spent a bit of time now trying to think about a topic that I brought up about Hitler in a recent video, trying to understand how the seeming like paradox or the contradictory ideas that he, in some ways, very deeply grasped the flaws of the mind and how people can be influenced and taken advantage of. But at the same time, he didn't have like that intellectual sophistication around that topic to apply it to himself and to his own views and see if some of the things he was thinking about were flawed. And a perfect example of that is propaganda. Like, propaganda was perhaps his greatest tool. And when you read some of his, his writings, he talks about it, and the way in which he dissects it and understands the nuance and the power of it is I talk about PhD level math, figuratively, like the way we think, it's PhD level. But then at the same time, for example, after World War I, there's this whole kind of conspiracy myth that the Germans only surrendered because they were stabbed in the back. There was socialists and Jews and others who kind of manipulated the army and tricked them and stabbed them in the back. And it seems to be pretty widely discredited that it wasn't true, and a lot of people even knew it at the time. It was in effect propaganda, and Hitler bought into that, and he believed it. So what I've been trying to think about is that, like, how could he understand that the powers that be could spew out lies or fake information to influence people and get them to think or act a certain way, but then when it's applied to him, he didn't see it? How did he miss that? How could you be so sophisticated and then miss it? And I'm really struggling to come up with an answer to that, for sure. To be honest, I'm trying to kind of think through what it could be. And the obvious, right, if you go first level why, is, well, his emotions got in the way. He wanted to believe it to be true. It aligned with a view that he had that he thought was important, or a value he had, or a belief. And that's true, but the question is, but still, why, right? Like, so he fell victim to how people fall victim to propaganda. He had that flaw of the mind, but he knew about it. If he knew about it, why couldn't he apply it to himself? Why wasn't his default mode to think, hey, if that works on them, this probably works on me, so I have to be on guard somewhat? There's not an easy answer, right? The most obvious answer is he just didn't question it. He didn't even think. He didn't even consider the idea that on that topic he could be influenced, because he was certain that he understood that topic, right? And in this case, it's the topic of, how really amazing and special Germany was, and how there were certain groups within it, different from geo or social, whether it be the Slavs and the Poles, or socialists with certain agendas, or Jews. He was so certain about what they were, and that how beneath Germans they were, and all that stuff. And so that explains it, right? He was certain, but again, why? How could he have gotten to a place of such certainty when the capacity he had to think logically on other areas was so high? How could he not apply it to that same thing? And again, I don't have a good answer to it. I really don't. I mean, I start to go down a path of, perhaps there's certain views you form at such a young age, because his nationalism for Germany and his views of people, formed relatively young, at least some of them, I think. So maybe there's something to that there's certain views that you form at such a young age, they become almost, they become so ingrained and so deep-rooted that they bypass any faculties of the brain. It's just assumed as a universal, unquestionable truth. And no matter how sophisticated you get in your thinking, no matter how much you try and better understand yourself and the way you think, that almost seems off in some area that you can't access. And that may be true. I mean, it's entirely possible that I'm doing the same thing. There's topics that I have, as much as I like to think I'm actively probing it. But it's a question that I'm hoping, as I continue to read this book and learn more, I can answer better, because it's an important one. I mean, in some ways, it's the question. It's the question if you really want to think better, if you really want to try and practice these things, you have to be able to identify it in that setting, right? That thing that's blind to you. If you can access that, that tells you you've got it.